You know that feeling when you walk into a conference room and you can already smell the disaster brewing? That's exactly where I found myself last Tuesday morning. The air was thick with the kind of tension that makes your shoulders tense up before you even sit down. And there I was, watching my colleagues throw around corporate buzzwords like they were magic spells that could somehow transform their incompetence into brilliance. But I'm no fool. I've been in this game long enough to recognize the signs. I've seen this exact scenario play out more times than I care to count, and every single time, I'm the one left holding the pieces when everything falls apart. There's Steve sitting across from me with that smug smile plastered on his face, completely oblivious to the fact that he's about to torpedo the entire meeting. The client, a major account worth more than Steve's salary for the next 5 years, is sitting there with their arms crossed, already looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. And Steve thinks he's about to close the deal of the century. I can see it coming from a mile away. The way Steve's eyes light up when he thinks he's about to drop some revolutionary insight. The way he leans forward, ready to unleash whatever corporate garbage he's been rehearsing in his head. I want to reach across the table and shake him, tell him to just shut up and let someone competent handle this. But I know better. I know that in about 30 seconds, Steve's gonna say something so spectacularly tone deaf that I'll be spending the next week in damage control mode. Again. Because that's what I do. That's what I've always done. I'm the cleanup crew for other people's disasters, the silent fixer who swoops in when everything goes to hell. And I'm tired. God, I'm so tired of it. You want to know the worst part? I already know exactly how this is going to play out. Steve's going to open his mouth and say something that makes the client's eye twitch. You know that involuntary reaction people have when they're trying not to roll their eyes so hard they fall out of their head. Then there's going to be this awkward silence where everyone pretends that what just happened didn't actually happen. The client's going to shift in their chair, maybe clear their throat, and I'm going to have to jump in and translate Steve's gibberish into something resembling professional communication. But what if this time I don't? What if this time I just sit back and let Steve dig his own grave? The thought is so tempting, it makes my chest tight with anticipation. And then it happens, right on schedule, like clockwork. Steve opens his mouth and completely butchers the contract details we've been negotiating for months. Not just a small mistake, a catastrophic misunderstanding that makes it sound like we're offering services we don't provide at rates that would bankrupt us within a quarter. The client's face goes from mildly annoyed to genuinely confused to openly frustrated in the span of about 10 seconds. I can see them mentally calculating how much time they've wasted in this room, how many other meetings they could have been in instead of listening to Steve's masterclass in professional incompetence. My hands are gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles have gone white. Every instinct I have is screaming at me to jump in, to fix this, to smooth things over like I always do. Because that's my role, isn't it? That's what they pay me for. Not to lead, not to innovate, not to get recognition for the work I actually do, just to clean up after people like Steve when they inevitably screw things up. But something's different this time. Maybe it's the way Steve's still sitting there with that confident smile, completely unaware that he just lit the entire relationship on fire. Maybe it's the way the client is looking at me, like they're expecting me to explain how someone this incompetent ended up in charge of their account. Or maybe it's just that I've finally reached my breaking point. So I do step in. Of course I do. Because despite everything, despite my anger and frustration, and the voice in my head screaming that Steve deserves to crash and burn, I can't just watch our biggest client walk away. I smooth things over with the kind of practiced professionalism that comes from years of cleaning up other people's messes. I clarify the contract terms, address their concerns, and somehow manage to salvage what's left of the meeting. The client leaves looking mollified but not entirely convinced. Steve? Steve acts like he just won an Oscar for best performance in a business meeting. He's actually patting himself on the back for handling that tough crowd, while I'm sitting there wondering if anyone else noticed that I was the one who prevented a complete disaster. But I don't say anything. I just sit there in the silence that follows, letting it simmer. Because for the first time in my career, I'm not going to pretend that everything's fine. I'm not going to smile and nod and act like Steve deserves any credit for the work I just did. I'm done with that performance. The aftermath is exactly what you'd expect. I spend the next 3 days working overtime, sending carefully crafted follow-up emails to reassure the client that we actually do know what we're doing. I restate the contract terms in language so clear that even Steve couldn't misinterpret them. I provide additional documentation, answer questions that shouldn't need answering, and generally bend over backward to rebuild the confidence that Steve demolished in 30 seconds of verbal diarrhea. Meanwhile, Steve's walking around the office like he just single-handedly landed the account. He's telling anyone who'll listen about his strategic approach to the negotiation and how he really connected with the client. The rage I feel listening to him is so intense, it's actually making me nauseous. This man nearly destroyed a $1 million relationship with his incompetence, and now he's acting like he's some kind of business development genius. But what really gets me is the silence from upper management. I send my follow-up report showing exactly what I did to save the account. I document every conversation, every email, every phone call that went into repairing the damage Steve caused. And what do I get in response? Nothing. Not a thank you, not an acknowledgement, not even a brief nod in my direction during the next team meeting. I don't need praise. I've long since given up expecting recognition for doing my job well, but I need them to see what actually happened. I need them to understand that without my intervention, we would have lost our biggest client because Steve doesn't know the difference between our actual services and the fantasy version he apparently invented during the meeting. But they don't see it, or they do see it, and they just don't care. Either way, the message is clear. I'm invisible. I'm the person who makes things work, but I'm not the person who gets credit for making things work. That honor goes to people like Steve, who have mastered the art of looking important while accomplishing nothing. So I make a decision. I'm done being the invisible fixer. I'm done watching incompetent people get promoted while I do the actual work that keeps this company running. If they want to pretend that Steve is the hero of this story, then I'm going to give them exactly what they want. I pull up the contract, the real one, not the fantasy version Steve was describing in the meeting, and that's when I see it. Buried in the legal language, tucked away in a section that most people would skim over without reading carefully. There's a clause that I insisted on months ago, a clause that gives our company certain protections, but also gives the client specific rights regarding account management changes. It's a detail I fought for during the original negotiations, while everyone else was focused on the flashier terms. They thought I was being overly cautious, worrying about scenarios that would never happen. But I knew better. I always know better. This clause is my insurance policy. It ensures that if there are significant changes to the account management team, the client has the right to review and potentially renegotiate the terms. It was designed to protect them from exactly the kind of situation we're in now, where incompetent account managers could jeopardize their interests. The beauty of it is that everyone signed off on this contract without really understanding what this clause meant. They were so focused on the dollar amounts and delivery timelines that they missed the fine print that actually matters. The fine print that I made sure was there because I've seen how these things play out. I lean back in my chair, staring at those few lines of text that represent months of careful planning. Because even back then, even when I was still naive enough to think that hard work and competence would be rewarded, some part of me knew this day would come. Some part of me knew that I would eventually reach a breaking point where I'd need leverage. The client is still on the fence about whether to renew the contract. Steve's performance didn't exactly inspire confidence, and despite my cleanup efforts, they're clearly having second thoughts about continuing the relationship. They're watching to see how we handle the transition, whether we can actually deliver on our promises, or whether that meeting was a preview of the kind of service they can expect going forward. What they don't know, what nobody knows except me, is that I've just created a scenario where I hold all the cards. The clause I fought for gives the client the power to demand changes if they're not satisfied with their account management. And after Steve's spectacular failure, I don't think it would take much to convince them that changes are necessary. But I'm not going to push that button, not yet, because there's something else I need to happen first. The call comes 2 weeks later. I'm sitting at my desk, working on yet another project that someone else will probably take credit for, when my phone rings. It's the CFO's assistant, asking if I can come to a meeting in the executive conference room, not scheduling a meeting for later, asking if I can come right now. I know what this is about before I even hang up the phone. Someone finally noticed the tension around the client account. Someone finally realized that maybe they should check in on how things are going, and somehow I'm the one being called to explain it. I walk into that conference room, and it's like a tribunal. The CFO is there, along with the VP of Business Development and Steve's direct manager. They're all sitting on one side of the table, leaving me a single chair on the other side. It's the kind of setup designed to make you feel small and defensive. But I don't feel small. I feel calm. Calmer than I've felt in months, actually, because I finally understand what's happening here. The CFO clears his throat and tells me they've been hearing some concerns about the client relationship. They've gotten feedback that there might have been some tension during the recent contract renewal discussions. They want to know if there's anything I'd like to share about how that meeting went. I almost laugh. They're fishing. They know something went wrong, but they don't know what. And instead of asking Steve, the person who actually caused the problem, they're asking me because somewhere in the back of their minds, they know that if there was a problem, I'm the one who would have fixed it. So I tell them exactly what happened. I walk them through Steve's mistakes, point by point. I explain how he misrepresented our services, confused the pricing structure, and generally made us look like amateurs in front of our biggest client. I detail the hours I spent cleaning up his mess, the follow-up calls and emails, the careful rebuilding of a relationship that he nearly destroyed. They listen with the kind of uncomfortable silence that tells me they already knew most of this. They just wanted to hear me say it out loud, to confirm their suspicions about how things really went down. And then comes the part that makes my blood boil. The VP of Business Development leans forward and tells me that while they appreciate my efforts to manage the situation, they're concerned about the dynamics within the team. They've heard that there might have been some finger pointing after the meeting, some undermining of Steve's authority. They want to make sure that everyone's working together as a cohesive unit. In other words, they want me to apologize for making Steve look bad. They want me to take responsibility for the team dynamics that resulted from his incompetence. They want me to pretend that pointing out factual errors is somehow equivalent to undermining authority. The rage that washes over me is so intense, I can feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I don't let it show. I don't raise my voice or storm out of the room or tell them exactly what I think of their twisted logic. Instead, I do something that surprises even me. I agree. I tell them they're absolutely right. Team cohesion is essential, and I should have handled the situation differently. I should have been more supportive of Steve's approach, even if I had concerns about the details. I promise to be more mindful of team dynamics going forward and to communicate any concerns through proper channels rather than addressing them directly in client meetings. They look relieved. They were probably expecting pushback, maybe even a confrontation. Instead, they got exactly what they wanted: my public admission that I was wrong to step in and save their biggest account. The meeting ends with handshakes and empty promises about better communication. I walk back to my desk, feeling lighter than I have in years, because I've just sealed my own fate, and for the first time in my career, I'm the one holding the cards. I sit down at my computer and start typing, not an email to the client or a project update, or any of the usual work that fills my days. Instead, I'm crafting my resignation letter. But this isn't just any resignation letter. This is a masterpiece of corporate strategy, carefully worded to trigger that clause I buried in the contract months ago. I'm not just leaving. I'm creating a situation where the client has the legal right to review and potentially terminate their relationship with the company. The letter is professional, cordial even. I thank them for the opportunities I've been given, express my confidence in the team's ability to continue serving the client's needs, and provide the required 2 weeks' notice. But buried in the professional language is a carefully crafted explanation of my role in managing the account, my detailed knowledge of the client's needs and preferences, and my deep involvement in the implementation of their current service package. In other words, I'm documenting exactly how integral I am to the relationship, while making it clear that I'm walking away. I'm creating a paper trail that shows the client will be losing the person who actually understands their business and manages their account, while keeping the person who nearly destroyed the relationship in the first place. I copy the legal department on the email, knowing they'll recognize the implications immediately. The contract I helped negotiate requires notification of significant account management changes, and my departure definitely qualifies. They'll have to inform the client within 48 hours, and once that happens, the clock starts ticking on the client's right to review the relationship. I hit send and lean back in my chair. It's done. After years of being the invisible fixer, I'm finally making myself visible in the most powerful way possible, through my absence. The response is immediate, within an hour. I have 3 separate managers trying to schedule urgent meetings with me. My phone is ringing nonstop with calls I don't answer. My email inbox is filling up with increasingly frantic messages asking me to reconsider and discuss my decision. But I'm not discussing anything. I've made my choice, and unlike every other decision in this company, this one isn't up for committee review or group consensus. This one is mine. The next morning, I come into the office to find absolute chaos. The legal department has indeed notified the client about my departure, as required by the contract. And the client? The client is not happy. They're demanding an immediate meeting to discuss the transition plan. They want to know who will be taking over my responsibilities, how the company plans to maintain the level of service they've grown accustomed to, and what guarantees they have that there won't be any disruption to their operations. These are all reasonable questions. Questions that should have easy answers if the company actually understood what I do and had been planning for succession. But they don't have easy answers because nobody bothered to document my processes or cross train other team members. They all just assumed I would be there forever, quietly fixing problems and making everyone else look competent. Steve is running around like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to figure out how to handle a client he's never actually worked with directly. He keeps asking me for transition notes and quick briefings, as if my years of relationship building and problem solving can be summarized in a PowerPoint presentation. The executives are in full panic mode, realizing for the first time how much they don't know about their own biggest account. They're discovering that I wasn't just handling the day-to-day communication, I was managing the entire strategic relationship, anticipating problems before they happened, and customizing our services to meet needs that the client never even had to articulate because I already understood them. But the most beautiful part is watching them realize that they can't fix this by throwing money at it or reassigning other people to cover my responsibilities. The relationship I built with this client was personal and professional in ways that can't be replicated overnight. The trust I earned through years of competent service and reliable problem solving isn't something Steve can inherit just because they give him my job title. The client knows this too. When they finally get their meeting with senior management, they make it crystal clear that they're not interested in a superficial transition plan. They want to know why their primary point of contact, the person who actually understood their business, decided to leave. They want to understand what this says about the company's commitment to their account and their satisfaction with the service level. These are uncomfortable questions that nobody wants to answer honestly. Because the honest answer is that the company systematically undervalued the person who made their biggest client relationship work, while promoting the person who nearly destroyed it. But they can't say that. Instead, they stumble through explanations about career opportunities and organizational changes that satisfy no one. The client listens politely, but I can see in their body language that they're not buying it. They know something's wrong, and they're starting to wonder if this is the kind of organization they want to be doing business with. I watch all of this unfold from my desk, where I'm quietly finishing up my remaining projects and organizing my files. I'm not participating in the panic or the emergency meetings or the frantic attempts to convince me to stay. I'm just doing my job for 2 more weeks, exactly as professional standards require. The irony is delicious. For years, they treated me like I was replaceable, like my contributions were just part of the background noise that keeps any organization running. Now they're discovering that some things aren't as replaceable as they thought. Some relationships take years to build and can be destroyed in a moment of corporate stupidity. By the end of my first week of notice, the client has invoked their right to review the contract terms. They're not threatening to leave, not yet, but they're making it clear that they expect significant changes to how their account is managed, and they want those changes documented in writing before they'll agree to any renewal. The executives are scrambling to figure out what those changes might look like. They're offering the client everything they can think of: dedicated account teams, enhanced service levels, regular executive check-ins. But what they can't offer is the one thing the client actually wants: confidence that their account will be managed by someone who actually knows what they're doing. Steve is quickly revealing himself to be exactly as incompetent as I always knew he was. Without me there to clean up his mistakes, his flaws are becoming impossible to hide. He's making basic errors, missing important details, and generally proving that his promotion was based on politics rather than competence. The client notices. Of course they notice. They're paying too much money to accept amateur hour service from someone who clearly doesn't understand their business. And every mistake Steve makes just reinforces their decision to review the relationship. On my last day, I have a final meeting with the executive team. They want to make one last attempt to convince me to stay, offering everything from salary increases to title changes to promises about future opportunities. They're desperate and it shows. But I'm not interested in their offers. I've made my decision, and unlike them, I don't second guess myself when I know I'm right. I thank them politely for their time and consideration, shake hands all around, and walk out of that conference room for the last time. As I'm packing up my desk, Steve approaches me one final time. He wants to know if there are any last minute insights I can share about managing the client relationship. He's still acting like this is just a normal transition, like he's taking over a well organized project from a colleague rather than trying to salvage a relationship that his own incompetence put at risk. I look at him for a long moment. This man who nearly destroyed our biggest account and then got promoted for it. This man who's about to learn exactly how much work goes into making him look competent. And I tell him exactly what he needs to know. Good luck. That's it. No detailed briefing, no helpful transition notes, no friendly advice about how to handle difficult situations. Just good luck, because he's going to need it. I walk out of that office for the last time, and I don't look back, because I'm finally free from the exhausting cycle of fixing other people's mistakes and watching them get credit for my work. I'm free from the thankless job of being everyone's safety net while remaining invisible myself. 3 weeks later, I get a call from a former colleague. The client has terminated their contract, not renewed under different terms, not negotiated a reduced scope, terminated completely. They decided that the instability in account management and the clear gaps in institutional knowledge made the relationship too risky to continue. Steve has been quietly moved to a different department. The executives are doing damage control with their other major accounts, trying to prevent a broader crisis of confidence. And the company has learned a very expensive lesson about the difference between people who look important and people who actually are important. I feel a moment of satisfaction hearing this news, but it's quickly replaced by something deeper. Relief, maybe, or vindication. I spent years watching incompetent people get promoted while I did the actual work that kept the company running. I spent years being told that my contributions were valuable while being treated like they were replaceable. Now they know better. Now they understand that some people are harder to replace than they thought. Some relationships take years to build and can be destroyed by a single bad decision. Some expertise can't be transferred in a 2 week transition period. But most importantly, they've learned that there are consequences for taking good people for granted. There are prices to pay for promoting politics over competence, for rewarding the appearance of success rather than actual results. I didn't need to scream or fight or make dramatic gestures to prove my point. I didn't need to burn bridges or cause scenes or give angry speeches about how I was mistreated. I just needed to stop fixing their problems and let them see what their organization actually looked like without me propping it up. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop doing the thing that everyone takes for granted. Sometimes the best way to prove your value is to take it away and let people experience the consequences of their own decisions. I never wanted to be the person who brought down a major client relationship. I never wanted to be responsible for someone losing their job or a company losing revenue. But I also couldn't continue being the invisible foundation that allowed incompetent people to build their careers on my work. In the end, I made a choice. I chose my own self-respect over their convenience. I chose accountability over the status quo. I chose to stop being complicit in a system that rewarded failure and punished competence. And you know what? I'd make the same choice again. Because sometimes you have to be willing to let things fall apart to prove that you were the one holding them together all along. Sometimes you have to stop being everyone's safety net to force them to learn how to succeed on their own. If you've ever been the person who makes everything work while watching someone else take the credit, you understand the anger that drives decisions like this. If you've ever been the invisible fixer, the reliable problem solver, the person who gets called when everything goes wrong but ignored when everything goes right, you know exactly why I did what I did. Because in the end, being invisible isn't sustainable. Being taken for granted isn't acceptable. And sometimes the only way to make people see your value is to take it away and let them learn the hard way what they've lost.